Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where generally we talk about today's digital revolution and the way it's shaken everything up. But more recently, we've also, of course, been talking about the things that's on everybody's mind around the world. That doesn't usually happen, but I think we're in one of those times right now with COVID-19. So it's having pretty wild impact as well. But we're carrying on here with our discussions with some of our digital all-star monthly guests. And today we're delighted to have back our regular speaker, Sean Ammirati, who every month comes to speak with us about Ammirati on innovation. Sean's a professor at Carnegie Mellon, where he helps in the corporate startup lab. Big companies think like entrepreneurs, think like little high growth companies. He's also a podcaster, a serial entrepreneur, and author. Sean, thanks for being with us. Always good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Sean, we chatted a little as we were getting set up here. As a venture capitalist and working with some startup companies, you mentioned that the co-CEO thing that is sort of in the air here, most recently with SAP, sometimes comes up among some of your portfolio companies. What's their view on it, and what's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly not all of them, right? Some of them, there's a clear CEO and clear other people, but sometimes you have, two founders who really started the business together, think of themselves as partners in crime, and they'll come to you kind of with this proposal like, hey, we've been thinking, rather than one of us be in charge, what if we were both in charge together? But there are exceptions to every rule. We did it one time for one season with one company, but in general, I think my reaction is kind of similar to the feedback you provided to SAP, right? Which is like, if to say somebody's in charge, that implies somebody's in charge, not two people are in charge. It sort of implies that nobody's in charge when multiple people are in charge. And I think if you think about the leadership that's been shown over this crisis, I thought you did just a wonderful job talking about Mark's leadership at Salesforce and his sort of remarkable pivot given the both economic and health crisis that we're in the middle of right now. Right, the reality is that's the benefit to one person clearly having the buck stop with him or her. Right, think how much more complicated those pivots would have been if the hospital had called two people and then they had to talk about it and think about it, versus the ability for one person to act decisively. And I think, clearly in the case of what Mark did with and is doing with Salesforce, make the world a better place, but also allow the company to respond as it needed to, so that it can hopefully come out the other side of this stronger from all the other dimensions as well.
Sean, since you mentioned that, I can understand in some part that, the Mark Benioff, he was the creator of the idea for Salesforce. In some ways, the creator of the idea for cloud. And he, for 20 years, somebody of my vintage, 20 years is not all that much. Somebody more your age, 20 years is a long time for most. 20 years, 2 decades, that's a lot of time. And he has been in there, full force, high energy, high impact, all in all the time for it. So I almost got a sense a couple of years ago, okay, is this in perhaps the beginning of the end of Mark's full-time immersion here, and he's going to move to the next adventure of his life when he named Keith. But for whatever the two things were there, and Keith was a phenomenal high-level executive at Salesforce for a lot of years, so it's no knock on him. But I also remember thinking at the time, you can't, whatever title you put on a person, co-CEO, or make the other person the super CEO, and Mark, it just can't be done sometimes, right? The laws of physics are such that certain bodies draw more mass to them and are just more influential. They have more heft, and no description, no painting, no colors, no titles are going to change that. So from a big company like Salesforce to some of your portfolio companies, right? As you said, there's a reason that a person is in charge.
That's right. And I should say, Keith is a CMU alum actually, and has been really great to the university. He created the Block Center here, which is actually a fascinating center on campus looking at a lot of the societal impacts of technology and has been a great supporter. So completely agree, but with all the things you said, and also appreciate the remarkable things he's done for the world as well. But I think if you want, if 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 a person, a founder, wants to get to a point where they want to take on the next adventure in their life, they need to do it like Bill Gates has done it, right? Like there's a very big difference between getting out of the way and handing the reins over to somebody else. And that doesn't mean that you have no influence. I suspect Bill Gates has had plenty of influence after making that transition, but really clearly pointing all the energy at somebody else versus this sort of sharing of responsibilities that I think it becomes confusing. And look, the impact of a founder on a company is amazing. It's part of what makes it remarkable to do the job that I get to do every day. Founders are some of the most creative and innovative people, and they have a combination of kind of intellectual courage and comfort being contrarian that makes them pretty remarkable. And so I think it's great to have the founder involved in the business, but I think if you want the founder involved in the business, then the founder needs to be involved in the business making those decisions, not sort of half in half out. And then more generally, when you just think about governance, right, the sort of corporate governance issues around this, I think ultimately the buck needs to stop with somebody, and that should be the CEO. And it's really hard to fragment that across multiple people. I know that it's a more common structure in Germany, which I think probably was part of the appeal there, but I think it's a challenging structure in general to execute against.
And Sean, I was at Oracle for many of the Mark Hurd, Safra Catz years, including several when they had been elevated from president to CEO. They never used the co-CEO term. They were just each CEOs.
They just had two CEOs there.
That's right.
Two,
that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
But any company, where Larry Ellison's still there, again, no knock at either Safra or Mark, but he was always the CEO, whatever his title was. So, but still to have the, two people running the company. I went, do you have given any thought to, is there something about the tech industry that sort of nurtures this idea along? Because as I'm not aware of any other company, at least based in the US, that has co-CEOs.
I'm not aware of any. I don't know of companies who've done it in the US. It's not something that I've studied closely, and I don't even have a ton of context for this, but I have heard it's a more common German leadership structure. I don't have a ton of details on that, but I have heard that from folks in passing. The other thing about, and I just know this from one of our partners who's a big German company that we do work with at CMU, the board in a German company is structured a little differently than boards in the US are as well. So they have different representatives on the board, and I think the boards are more operationally involved than you would typically see in an American company. So there's probably some cultural things there. I think in tech, part of what you're seeing is, how do I say this and not sound disrespectful? I think in the case of a to your point on Larry Ellison with those two, right? In a situation like that, I think sometimes founders kind of want to have their cake and eat it too, like push some of the uninteresting stuff off to other people, but still keep involved in the interesting stuff. And I'm not, I don't have any inside knowledge on Oracle, so I don't know for sure that that's the case, but my sense is just from things I've heard from other people, that sometimes becomes the appeal to it in tech. And the reality is, the digital revolution that we've lived through over the last 30 years, right? The people, the Ellisons, the Larry and Sergey, these Mark Zuckerberg, these are the Mellons and Carnegies of this generation, right? And so, I think you reach a certain level of wherewithal, and you start wanting to do a bunch of different things, and that's probably a natural human reaction. But yeah, I'm not aware of other companies in the US moving forward with a structure like this.
Hey, Sean, one thing I wanted to ask you about involving SAP, and for anybody who hadn't heard about this, one of the reasons they're sort of in the news lately is they had Bill McDermott left last fall to go to ServiceNow. They elevated two fantastic young executives to be co-CEOs, Christian Klein and Jen Morgan. And early this week, SAP made the announcement that Jen Morgan was leaving as co-CEO, and SAP said it's because in times like this, they needed to have a simpler, cleaner decision-making structure and org structure. But one of the things that came up, Sean, in the SAP earnings call the other day, Christian Klein mentioned that over the last few months leading up to the whole COVID-19 crisis, but certainly during that, he said they've been able to get 30% now of their business, he said, is a no-touch business. It's all digital. There's no human intervention from the time a customer selects and chooses what he or she wants to the time it's actually provisioned. I was surprised by that number, that it seemed high. It was surprisingly high. I wonder, you look at things from a lot of new companies as well as big established companies. What's your sense of that 30% as a mark that's either high and going to get higher quickly, or are we lagging behind where things should be in that?
Yeah, I think that it probably depends a little bit on the verticals that you're selling and marketing into. But I think what you're going to see is a lot of trends that felt like they were far off as we come out of this crisis are going to feel just much more inevitable, right? So remote work, right? Every single one of our companies and certainly almost every company in the world right now is trying to figure out how to do most, or in the case of all of our companies, all of their work in a distributed fashion. I don't think when this is over, we're going to go back to, we're going to keep at 100% of work distributed, but I do think you're going to see a lot more remote work now than you would have seen kind of if this crisis hadn't happened. Similarly, I teach at Carnegie Mellon. We, in about a week, transitioned, we told our students while they were on spring break, basically, if you can stay home, stay home. Now, we had some students that were international students that hadn't left, and maybe by the time that decision came down, they weren't able to get home. So we still have about 400 students on campus, and the school is doing an amazing job keeping them safe and adapting kind of their living situation to accommodate them. And it's, I think that's amazing. But the reality is most of our students, the vast majority, are home and they're taking classes online. The classes that I'm teaching right now, the sample that I have, 100% of my students are now off campus. I'm not on campus. I'm teaching from actually the same exact place I'm doing this recording from with you. And we have students in China. I have students in Europe, right? So they're literally distributed around the world and 100% remote. I think when this ends, and for education, it might, we might come back to in-person even a little later. We'll see. Right now, CMU has said we want, as of when we're recording this, CMU is saying we know we won't be back on campus before August at the earliest. But the chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, it was reported in the PG this week, told his team to be ready to go till January, for example. So TBD, but it's going to be a while, I think, before we're back, at least the summer session as well. I think when we go back, I suspect there will be a lot more hybrid education than there was when we came into it, right? So these trends that felt like, if you would have asked the dean at my school, what do you think about online distance learning? He would have said, yeah, it's really important. And in fact, Tepper had set up an online hybrid MBA program, but man, this has accelerated this path to that future. Now, there are other parts of the economy that I just think, I think you're going to see them adapt and sort of shed this, even within education. I have a second and a third grader. They're doing distance learning right now. The teachers are both of their teachers are doing an amazing job making the best of the situation they're in. But I think the only thing this has taught myself and the other parents is we would like them back in a classroom every day. Because I think, elementary age kids just don't learn as well over Zoom as they do in a classroom. And so certain things, I think you'll see it snap back to just the way it was before. So I think how this impacts a company like SAP is, there are probably parts of their business that they would have said, okay, we expect this process of digital transformation to put us in a situation where, the way this service is delivered and we expect it to be no touch, completely digital 3 years from now. And I think what you're going to see is those forecasts get pulled up dramatically where it makes sense. I mean, just one last example is online grocery delivery, right? So many people told me, oh, I would never get my groceries delivered through a service like that. And lo and behold, as has been said before, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? So lo and behold, this crisis has taught many of them that, hey, I can save an hour or two a week if I Instacart my groceries instead. So we'll see. But my sense is that's what you're seeing there. We're seeing it across our companies. There are businesses that we have investments in that it's pulled up a lot of these things that were further out on the roadmap because of that. And in some cases created real tailwinds for the business. And even in those cases, obviously they would much prefer to not have this crisis going on. And in other parts of the business, we are still like right up against the economic and health challenges. And while health has to be the priority right now, like the economic stuff is right behind it, obviously.
Hey, Sean, a couple more things I wanted to check with you on. I like that term of hybrid education. But it's just an interesting approach that I think we're going to see hybrid in a lot of parts of our lives. But in previous episodes, you've had some great insights into the company WeWork and perhaps the misperception that it itself tried to create here, that it's a tech company. It's just like Facebook or Google or somebody, when clear it is. And you said it's a commercial real estate business. So in the commercial real estate field, they were tinkering with some of these new models like Rework and Spire, and they said, okay, we're set. We got some digital going. We're ready for the 21st century. Then this hits. And then a lot of businesses say, we're not going to have everybody come to headquarters anymore. Have you thought some about, what's that going to look like?
So the problem for WeWork specifically is, as you peel the onion back, it looks like that situation was even more screwed up than anybody appreciated. So my sense is the only path out for WeWork at this point is to really rip the Band-Aid off, have the equity holders get completely washed out here. As people probably saw who've been following that saga, SoftBank has actually pulled an offer, blaming it on some things that feel a little bit opportunistic, to put it diplomatically. And I think the shareholders are rightly going to take that to the courts, and we'll see where that all nets out. But I think more generally, as we move to this, not completely working remotely, but this sort of, more remote work than ever before, I think you're going to see that be an incredible tailwind for the co-working spaces once they adapt to it. And although WeWork as a business, none of the shareholders may realize the value of that, I think co-working as a trend, is going to really benefit from that. Because if you're going to do this sort of hybrid style of work, right, you're going to want to provide these sort of mixed use places for your teams to go to at least part of the time. And I think this is going to be very, very compelling for the commercial real estate space in general. What I'm interested in is, will one of the big commercial real estate companies take this opportunity to basically execute their own Disney Plus strategy here, right? Because they do have assets and balance sheets and are well managed in a way where like many of them could, probably redesign and launch kind of a startup within their entities to do that. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for some of the large established players there, to be determined if any of them ultimately do that, because certainly the core part of their business is going to be damaged pretty dramatically as I think traditional office space looks very different. But say it again, right? A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. This is an opportunity for them to maybe accelerate into that future together. And speaking of Disney Plus, I don't know if you saw 50 million subscribers now. So they are now a third of Netflix in 2 quarters, right? So remember, like the end of the first quarter, we were all excited about roughly 25 million, 26 million subscribers. They come out with their next quarter results and like, oh yeah, by the way, we almost doubled that again. We're over 50 million. And just to put that in context, obviously it was an earlier time. Obviously, bandwidth proliferation was not as broad as it is today. I think, I wrote a whole book on how entities with product market fit scale. And one of the things we talk a lot about is what I call catalyzing events in that book. I think the COVID crisis was 100% a catalyzing event for the Disney Plus startup. So I get all of that, but just contextually, what Disney Plus did last quarter took Netflix 2 years and 1 quarter, right? I mean, this is the case study for corporate innovation. And actually going back to this commercial real estate space, don't forget Disney's core business, theme parks. I think it's a poor choice. Would you rather be in the theme park business or in the office space business? They both have challenges right now, right? But I think, credit to the Disney team to have a solution like this that's out there that allows them to have this sort of creating their future instead of being disrupted by the future.
Yeah, Sean, what you just said there, creating your own future, reminds me, 30 years ago, I was traveling out to San Francisco a lot, and I used to listen to this radio station out there. There was this thing, Sean, you probably don't remember it, but they were called radio stations and terrestrial
They're sort of like podcasts. Is that what they're?
Yeah, well, kind of, sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, but there was this station called KFOG, great, classic rock music station, but they would have a news program. The guy was kind of half serious. His name was Scoop Misker. And at the end, he'd always say, well, that's our news, fog heads. If you don't like ours, go make some of your own. And he was ahead of his time with that. But Sean, I wanted to ask you before we go, through, of all the industries, you studied lots of different sorts of companies and business models and the impact of change and where things are headed. Everybody's, got some struggles right now, but what's your view on the airline business? What will an airline have to do when things get loosened up here to go from where they're at now, like 1-2% capacity? How do they get back up to a profitable, sustainable model?
Yeah. So I think last time when we were talking about this, we talked about sort of different companies and who was well positioned coming into this and who wasn't. And we made the reference, you can tell who's swimming naked when the tide goes out, which is the sort of famous quote about economic recessions. So I mean, the airline companies in general have taken all of their profits and plowed it into stock buybacks to put themselves in a very, very weak situation coming into this. And so, I think certainly some of the assets have value, and I think certainly transportation is going to be important, even if it's less important than it was before. So, similar to if we don't need to be in an office every day, I also suspect a lot of meetings that we used to think we would have to get on a plane and fly to, we'll figure out how to do remotely. So I think just demand, even once we're completely out of this, leaving aside the question of how long that is, I suspect demand will never get back to the levels it was before. That's kind of my intuition. The challenge is from here to there, most of those companies have been incredibly aggressive on the way up. And it's not that I'm saying a stock buyback never makes sense, but man, what if they would have used that money to invest in innovation instead of basically, artificially inflating the value of their stock so they could get a nice bonus, I think they'd all be in better spots today. And so, and I should say, like, I went to a college where, like, we were very proud to say that, like, we taught capitalism in the truest sense of the words. And right, what they taught me there was capitalism means some companies succeed and some companies fail. And if you take risk, you also need to be comfortable with the consequences of the risk that you're taking. It feels to me like many of them took some risks. They're now caught swimming with no clothes on because they've been aggressive, right? And being aggressive, if things shake out differently, then maybe you end up in a very different position based on the bets that you're taking there. But it feels to me like these businesses, while they may get propped up in the short term, ultimately what they're going to need to do is take those assets and reconstitute most of them to be a more rational business going forward with a different level of demand, and probably introduce some innovation to make it a more safe experience and a more pleasant experience for everybody involved. I mean, airports themselves are going to be, I think, some of the places most people stay away from the longest, just because even if you could make the flight itself a clean and sanitary experience, just, all the things from when you park your car to when you get in that airplane, it's going to be really, really challenging. And it's not that I don't think 1% capacity is the steady state conclusion either, but my sense is a decent percent of what they thought as peak capacity is never going to come back. And so they need to reimagine their businesses based on that. And so the question that I have is, are there some other business models that may make sense for them to think about exploring? So, and I realize these are very, United and the examples I'm going to cite are very, very different scale, but we both spend a lot of time in California, and Surf Air was an incredibly compelling model for a period of time, right? Where people basically had a subscription model that allowed them to do these short flights from Santa Barbara, LA, San Francisco, and they didn't fly into the major airports, right? They flew into the kind of regional airports. And a number of my colleagues were just fanatics about their Surf Air experience. And so I feel like, well, it may not be exactly the Surf Air experience, right? That's a different business model. That's a subscription instead of transactional business model. So it's probably transparently too late for the major carriers to figure that out where they sit today. They've been caught swimming with no clothes on at this point. But are we going to travel on airplanes again at some point? Yeah, I suspect we'll go way back up from the level we are today. And I think some business model innovation becomes probably a necessary ingredient on how you get from here to there.
Here to there. That's the question, Sean. Good stuff.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, thank you, my friend. Thanks for being here. Hang in there. Glad to hear you and your family are doing well. Stay safe out there, Sean. And thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, Bob. Same to you.
All right. Thanks to all of you folks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. We'll see you next time. And until then, please stay safe, stay healthy, stay generous. See you soon.